So when you wear historical fashion every day, you tend to hear a number of misconceptions told to you time and time again. I thought it would be educational to make a video of the 8 misconceptions about wearing historical fashion every day. This is all just my experience, of course, and wearing historical fashion daily could be different for different people, so this is really just what it has been like for me and what I have come across. All opinions are my own, basically. Misconception number 1 is that I wish I lived in the old days or during the Victorian period, and that's why I wear historical clothing every day. I do not wish I lived during those times. Life was really hard. Life is still really hard for a lot of people, and I definitely do not want to live during a time when medical was completely different than it is today, and women had way fewer rights than we do today. In general, I just would not want to live during those times. I would, however, like to time travel back in time for maybe 24 hours to experience what it's like, but doing so with today's medical supplies with me, etc. I actually have thought about this question a lot and what I would like to do in a fantasy reality where we can time travel. After the 24 hours would be up, I would want to immediately go back to the 21st century. I think most of all, I would like to know what it smelled like back then. I know that sounds like a weird thing, but we have some evidence for what things looked like, and also perhaps some things what they sounded like because there are some audio recordings. But the one thing that we really don't have much record of today is what things smelled like. So that is something that I'm so fascinated and curious about. I'm sure that London during Victorian times didn't smell great, but still it's a different experience, and it's something that I think I'd like to experience at least for 24 hours and then come back. The second misconception is that my clothing is uncomfortable and I just put up with it for the aesthetic, which is completely false. If my clothing was uncomfortable, I would not be wearing it every day. It's so comfortable that I can not only withstand wearing it, but I actually enjoy wearing it, which is a completely different thing. One of the reasons I actually do wear historical fashion so much is because of how convenient and comfortable it is, and also how versatile it is as well. I basically always feel the right temperature, except maybe on a very, very hot day, I get a little bit uncomfortable, but if I'm wearing the right layers for hotter weather, then I'm fine. But generally, I would say 98% of the year in the UK climate, I'm very, very comfortable. I think the biggest thing about comfort to consider with historical clothing is to keep your skirts at a manageable length. I tend to shorten a lot of my skirts to more walking length or even working length, and this is actually really historically accurate because tons of people wore their skirts at shorter lengths than we tend to think they do. The third misconception is that my clothes are very difficult to clean or that I never clean them. I've made a video on this topic about how I clean my clothes as well as how often I clean my historical clothing, and the overall summary of this video is that I do clean them quite regularly and I can clean them as well. It's just a different type of cleaning. I actually think in a sense it's far easier because a lot of what you're doing is in the moment preventative things. So basically doing a lot of spot cleaning or using alcohol spray to be able to disinfect things, and you have to do that usually right after you take off the garment. So you aren't left with this mass of laundry at the end of the week. You're kind of keeping things clean as you go along, and then there will be a big wash day where you might want to do some of your more undergarments or things like that. I actually think with this schedule it becomes a lot more manageable, but it's just about planning out your time, just like with a lot of things in life. And I think this also cuts down on environmental impact because less use of a laundry machine equates to less use of various resources. Misconception number 4 is that I am nuts for wearing a corset every day and that I'm constantly in pain and I must be so uncomfortable, yada yada, etc, etc. You've all heard the spiel before. For me, I really feel like I'm being nurtured when I'm wearing a corset. It's a very great experience both for confidence and for emotional reasons, but on top of that too, for me physically, I find that my back pain is significantly better. I'm able to work at the computer for longer without pain and also hand sew for longer. Misconception number 5 is that I hold historical values, or that I am demure, modest, or fill in the blank with your preferred Victorian adjective. I definitely do not hold historical values. I believe in historical style, not historical values. Having contemporary values and wearing historical clothing can coexist together, and we see this all the time. I think it's very typical for the brain to kind of jump into black or white thinking, so people kind of assume sometimes that if you wear these clothes, you must have those values, but there is so much gray in the world, and so many feelings and so many values and beliefs can coexist all at one time. So that that's something to think about, that a lot of people who wear these historical clothes can also have very modern and inclusive values. I wholly believe that there are many beautiful parts of history as well as tragic parts, but most of all that history is there for us to learn from and for us to grow from. Misconception number 6 is that going to the restroom is challenging. Undergarments, of course, vary from person to person, and there is no right or wrong way to wear your undergarments, especially with historical clothing. It is completely a personal preference, but generally the way that undergarments were traditionally worn in the 18th century is just with a shift in stockings, so it would have been really easy to use a chamber pot or to use the privy. And by the late 19th century, it would have been a lot of split crotch drawers or combinations with a split crotch, and that also would have made it very easy to use the restroom. I would actually say if you're sticking to traditional historical undergarments, then it's probably easier, if not the same, to use the bathroom. And if you have a massive crinoline or many petticoats or something, you can still sit down, you can still use the restroom. The materials that are used for the bones of a crinoline are actually really flexible, so it doesn't really impede on that. The only thing I think is really difficult with a very large crinoline is moving through hallways and things like that. And that's mainly just because of the sheer width of the actual thing. There are many crinolines that are more everyday kinds that are made for walking skirts and various things of that sort, and those are a lot more manageable, and they're really not much different than wearing a load of petticoats. Misconception number 7 is that people who wear historical clothing are just attention seekers who want to play dress up every day. I would say that this isn't the case. Of course, I can't really speak for anyone but myself, but generally what I've found is that people have much deeper reasons for wearing historical fashion, and a lot of the time going out in public in these clothes is actually the thing that many people fear the most. So a lot of people are going to feel far more comfortable wearing these things at home, typically, than they will out. And that just goes to show that they're not doing it for attention. They clearly have other reasons, and actually getting over that hurdle of going out in public in these clothes is the thing that becomes the difficult challenge. Speaking for myself personally, I generally feel pretty good out in public wearing historical clothing, but I do like to keep a really low profile, and I'm actually quite an introverted person, so I tend to be quite to myself a lot of the time. But I continue to wear these clothes because I'm an artist, and I have been for basically all of my life, and I want to wear walking art, and I love the sustainability aspects of knowing exactly where my clothes came from and spending 300-400 hours on one ensemble. There's something very special about that feeling. Our world can be so dark at times, and so I think finding things that bring us joy, especially if they aren't hurting anyone else, is so incredibly important now more than ever. Misconception number 8, the final misconception, is that I have limited mobility or trouble moving in these clothes. This is definitely false. Moving in historical clothing is again just different. Yes, there are certain garments that are going to be trickier to move in. Like I said about the crinolines, if they're very large, it can be difficult sometimes to walk through a hallway. But generally, everyday wear for the average human being back in the 18th or 19th century, clothing would have actually been very movable, because the concept of wanting to be comfortable is not a modern concept. This is something that has existed ever since humans have been alive. If we even just look at working class clothing, it's brilliant today for things like gardening, animal husbandry, farming, doing all things around the house. There are so many different uses for that type of clothing today, and it really does have a lot of practical elements. And even looking at more of the upper class fashions made of silks and such, these also still can be quite movable, and there is a whole range of different types of garments because people wore different garments for different occasions. So a walking suit, for instance, would have been really easy to walk in. And then there were a lot of sports-specific garments as well by the late 19th century, like cycling bloomers or cycling sweaters. There's even things like fencing outfits and archery costumes. I will, however, explain the nuance that there are some types of garments, like 1830s for instance, which are a little bit more challenging, I guess, to lift your arms in, but that's not for everything. There are still riding habits and red goes during the 1830s as well. So I think it's just really about knowing what styles you could have the greatest movement in. And if movement is a big priority for you, which I think it is for a lot of people, then definitely choose the things that you know you're going to be able to move in. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing of these 8 misconceptions about wearing historical fashion every day. If you are someone interested in how to implement more historical elements into a contemporary wardrobe, then I suggest that you watch this video next. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all on Thursday for another video.